Let me introduce Professor McGraw, Professor of Psychology and Marketing at the University of Colorado, and he's going to have an exhibit. Exhibit A as to what humor is all about. So let me give it to Professor Pete McGraw.
So one of the challenges of giving talks about humor is that people, I think rightfully, expect you to be funny. And I'm not a professional. I'm a professor, and you know how funny professors typically are. So in order to guarantee a touch of humor, I've actually invited a friend and a professional comedian who's part of the hot comedy trio here in Denver, the Growlix. They have their own show it's the last Friday of the month at the Bug Theater. And he's a very funny guy. He's actually related to the Humor Code project that I'll talk to you a little bit about. He was the ideas man behind the big challenge that I face. You might, if you're lucky, might have seen him on Conan really quite recently. I want to introduce Adam Caton-Holland.
Thank you, everybody. Keep it going for Professor Pete McGraw. How about that? I've never been referred to as a comedy exhibit, so this is nice. Study me, observe me in my natural habitat.
Butterfly.
Just like a butterfly. Pin me up and dissect me, everyone. It's nice to be here. This is a far cry from where I usually perform in bars and comedy clubs. But, Brown Palace Conference Hall with a bunch of super geniuses. It's fun. It's just fun. I think we're on the same page. Say it again?
This is a tough room.
Even super geniuses don't know you shouldn't heckle. Think they figure it out, they never figure it out.
Some of us just returned from a bar.
Some of you just returned from a bar? Everyone can smell you, sir. The secret's out. This is a good gig, though. I'm excited to be here for the 999 Society. This is not the only good gig I get. However, I get a lot of good gigs. For example, I was recently able to perform at a suburban elementary school career day, everybody. Yeah, thank you very much. just sponsor. Clap it up. Clap it up. My friend is a teacher at elementary school, and she's like, why don't you come in for career day, come talk to kids about stand-up comedy, because that's a really responsible choice for children to make. You could have all this, you guys. But I did it anyway, because I'm a hero. And I got to this school, and I'm waiting to go on to talk, and I'm literally standing in the hallway with, doctors and lawyers, cops, firefighters, nurses, awesome, legitimate professions. The kids could give a damn about any one of them. They were there to see me. I was the popular speaker. And so I kind of got up there, and I didn't know what to say. I kind of froze. So I said to I was just standing there stammering. My friend from the side of the room, she just goes, just do your act. You should just get out there and do your act. I was like, I'm pretty sure it's how you and I get arrested at the end of the day. Not a chance I'm doing my act. So I did all the clean material I had, and I still had 43 minutes left to fill. I was like, all right, I got this. I'm good on my toes. I'll improvise. I'll have the kids tell jokes. I'll critique those jokes. It'll pass the time. It'll be a lot of fun. And it was a lot of fun until this one little bastard in the back of the class raised his hand. And he's like, yeah, I got a joke. And I was like, all right, little dude, what's your joke? And he goes, why do midgets like to play soccer? And I was like, first of all, they prefer the term little people, so clean it up. And second of all, this is going to go south so fast. Just lightning fast. I was like, all right, little dude, why do midgets like to play soccer? And he's like, because the grass tickles their balls. It's just like, oh, no. Buddy, that is a playground joke, little buddy. Playground joke. But then as class was letting out, I made sure to pull him aside, and I whispered to him, I was like, there's nothing I can teach you that you don't already know. This career chose you. You're screwed. Have a cigarette. Life is over. I got drunk that night. Cool little kid. Filthy mouth, though. Everybody have a good prom this year? Did you guys enjoy prom? Everybody have a good prom season? You guys, you don't have to be in high school to enjoy prom. All you have to do is eat at a Cheesecake Factory during the month of May or June to see all of prom on display right there in front of you. That pre-prom dinner, that's my favorite thing ever. Like two 17-year-olds sitting opposite each other in ill-fitting fancy clothing, all full of nervous energy and anticipation. Is tonight going to be the night? I always want to lean in, tap the boy on that shoulder in the scenario, and just be like, I'm from the future. Not only are you not going to make out with that girl tonight, but this is also the happiest you'll ever be. And then I just walk off. I come out to the car and help me finish this bottle of peppermint schnapps. These Blink-182 CDs are not going to listen to themselves, you guys. A lot of Blink fans in the room. Target demo. Thank you for raising your hand. That guy took a break from texting to raise his hand. Went back to the texting. Speaking of Blink-182, back to the texting. Cool. When I was in the second grade, you guys, some mornings I'd come into the school and the classroom would be arranged like an airplane. There'd be two long rows of chairs. And we'd sit in those chairs and using the powers of our very fertile second grade imaginations, we'd pretend to fly to different countries all over the world and learn about them. Yeah. The other day, I left $12 on a $6 food purchase because I messed up calculating a 20% tip. Sometimes kids just need to go to school and do math. I can tell you all of the animals that live on the Serengeti. 90% of the animals that live on the Serengeti. If the big hand on the clock goes to 4 or 5, I don't know what's happening. 4:30 meeting, that's awesome. I'll be there at 3 or 6. Thanks, Montessori. I don't know how to do anything. I don't know how to do things. I do know there's 2 types of energy, however, potential and Connecticut. That much I know. Connecticut energy. The energy to be very liberal, but ultimately really boring. Got one? Getting them one at a time. Pass the laugh from table to table, person to person. Everybody have a little piece. Welcome to my comedy potluck. I'm the exhibit. Wendy's recently got rid of their slogan, and I missed it because I loved it. Their slogan was, "It's way better than fast food. It's Wendy's." Really? That's like saying, "It's way better than cancer. It's testicular cancer." I'm not buying it, Wendy's. I do like UPS's slogan. UPS's slogan is, "What can Brown do for you?" Every time I hear that slogan, I just want to yell out, "Sue the Board of Education!" Yes. I knew that would hit with a 999. Try that one in a comedy club, just blank stares. Thank you, guys. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. One guy tried to get a slow clap going. One guy was right. When I was in 5th grade, my best friend and I would go to the mall, and we'd go to Sparrow, and we'd order pepperoni pizza, and we'd eat the pepperoni off the pizza while we were in line, and then we'd only pay for cheese. Oh, we thought we were geniuses. And then when I was in high school, that same friend and I would steal a bunch of little items from a sporting goods store, and then we'd return them until we had enough store credit saved up to get North Face coats like Puffy and Mace. And we thought we were geniuses. And then in college, that same exact friend got expelled for plagiarizing a paper, and then he knocked up his 19-year-old girlfriend. And I realized only I was a genius. My mom is from the South, so I grew up half racist. I kid because I love her. Are there any Southerners here?
Yeah.
Yeah? Where are you from, sir?
South Carolina.
South Carolina. That's the legit South. My grandma's from Richmond, Virginia. That's where my mom grew up. And I like Southerners because, I don't know what they say this in South Carolina, they have cool sayings that the rest of the country doesn't use. For example, I was going for a hike with my grandmother outside of Richmond, and it was kind of sunny outside, but it started to rain a little bit. And without any provocation on my part, my grandma just goes, "You know what they say when it's sunny outside and it's raining? It means the devil's beating his wife." I said, "What? Where did that come from, Grandma?" But then about 2 hours after that, we found ourselves at the Cracker Barrel, because that's what you do. And my grandma made us thank Jesus for biscuits and free refills. And I realized my grandma doesn't have the firmest grasp on theology. I told that joke at a show one time, and this hick in the back screams out, he goes, "Richmond, Virginia? That ain't the South." To which I responded, "Well, it was the capital of the Confederacy." To which he responded, "Gay." Irrefutable logic, sir. Not the South at all. I'm from this state. I'm a Colorado kid, and I travel around the country doing comedy. And everywhere I used to go, people are like, "Oh man, are you from Colorado? That's cool. Do you ski?" Now everywhere I go, "Oh, you're from Colorado. Do you smoke weed?" Everywhere. It's like, no, I don't do either. I knit and take prescription pills, and I just knit faster. So forget what you think you know about my state. We get real weird. Now pot's legal here. You guys probably all heard about that. Any of you guys smoke pot? Anybody high right now? It's legal. It's fine. Blink 182 guy. I'm looking in your direction. I used to smoke a lot of pot in high school and college when it was age appropriate. And I remember my dad and we engaged in a little misguided attempt at father-son bonding. We decided, hey, we're both a couple cool cats. We should smoke some weed together. So we went on a camping trip up into them there Rocky Mountains. Went for a hike, came back, made a campsite. We smoked some weed together. And true story, we got so paranoid we left the campsite and stayed in a hotel. Didn't even pack up the tent, you guys. We freaked out. Came back the next morning very silently and shamefully, put everything away, no eye contact. The year after that, though, we came back and we camped with confidence because we were on cocaine by then. That stuff's a gateway drug, you guys. Anybody on coke right now? Come on, is this a conference or is this a conference? Let's let it loose. Diet Coke, yes! See what we're doing? It's good pun work. It's excellent pun work, ma'am. You guys would like my dad. When I was a kid, I'd always say, hey, Dad, I'm bored. And he'd go, you're boring. Shut me up every single time. And you are parents, take that. Your kid says I'm bored, tell them they're boring, cue their first existential crisis. I am boring. Why am I so boring? I should start a fire. Fires aren't boring. Everybody likes a fire. Trying to figure out how to gracefully dismount from this exhibit. I went to summer camp growing up. You guys go to summer camp when you were kids?
Yeah.
Yeah? Cool. You're so polite. Everyone's so polite. I'm telling you, at a comedy club, like, yeah, throw a beer bottle at your head. You guys are like, yeah, we did. We enjoyed it. Cool. Thank you. We went to summer camp. At my summer camp, we had to play the adjective name game as a meet and greet. I bet some of you have played this in awful orientation settings. Here's how it works. You think of an adjective that starts with the same first letter as the first letter of your name. Go around in a circle introducing yourselves and slowly realize this is going to be the worst summer of your entire life. But there were two other Adams that got to go up before me. So the first little Adam gets up there. He's like, hey, everybody, I'm Awesome Adam. I was like, first of all, that's a lie. Second of all, that was mine, but I got time to think. Think. Next little Adam gets up there. He's like, hey, everybody, I'm Athletic Adam. I was like, really, we're in the 5th grade. You weigh 276 pounds. You're Athletic Adam. That's fantastic. All right, man, think. And finally, the perfect adjective to describe myself hit me. And I have to tell you guys, by the end of that summer, there wasn't one camper there that didn't remember Antichrist Adam first and foremost. Hey, you guys have been a lot of fun. Thank you very much for listening to my jokes. Triple Nine Society. I'm going to bring up your main act. And I'm going to read his introduction to make sure that I get it perfect for him, and you're going to enjoy him. I've seen him do this sort of seminar many times, and I've loved it. Our speaker is an expert in the interdisciplinary fields of decision-making and emotion. He has been seeking an answer to an age-old question, what makes things funny? To do so, he started the Humor Research Lab at the University of Colorado, better known by its acronym, HURL. More recently, he teamed up with a journalist, Joel Warner, to conduct a global expedition that unites science and comedy, two topics that don't always get along. Their forthcoming book, The Humor Code, will be published by Simon & Schuster on April Fool's Day 2014. He joins us today to talk about using comedy to make change. So please help welcome Peter McGraw, everybody.
Let's hear it for Adam one more time. So I don't know what's better, having a comedian guarantee some laughs or having to follow that comedian. I actually spend a lot of time with comedians these days, and I'm always looking for advice from them. And one thing that they say is that it's really important to get a laugh right away, which is why I'm wearing this sweater vest. So the question of what makes things funny is, as Adam said, an age-old question. It dates back to Socrates and Plato. And it's one of those questions that when you think about it, is a really important one. So humor is something that we all care about. We pursue it in our entertainment choices and in our relationships, in our friends, our lovers, our coworkers. We even enjoy it with the strangers, the people that we meet just randomly, happenstance. But it goes beyond just that. Humor is something that at least been implicated in coping, helping us deal with pain, stress, and adversity. It's something that's worthy of scientific study, and it's the reason that people a lot smarter than I am have been trying to answer this question for a couple thousand years. I stumbled on the question about 5 years ago. I was actually studying what I found out to be a related question: what makes things wrong? I was giving a talk at Tulane University, and in that talk, I was discussing how churches and other religious organizations were engaging in commercial marketing, and decided to use what I thought was an entertaining, a provocative scenario, a situation, a church that was trying to get members of its congregation to go to its winter retreat, and they decided to host a raffle. The topic, the thing that they could win in this raffle, was a yellow H2 Hummer SUV. And what was interesting about that about that example is that the group of academics in the audience, they laughed, and one of them raised her hand and she said, "You're telling me that moral violations, things that people see as wrong, cause anger and disgust, and yet we're laughing. We're telling you that this is amusing, this is pleasurable. We're experiencing positive emotions. Why?" And I was dumbfounded. I had no answer to that question. I had been studying emotions for over 10 years at that point, and I had never once considered this question. I came home, came back to Colorado, and I recruited a very bright graduate student, Caleb Warren. And I said, this is an important question. We need to answer this question. And the next thing that we did, I can't say that I'm very proud of. I did what my undergraduate students do when they're starting a research project. I Googled it. And so if you Google humor theories, what you get back is what I call the big three, the primary explanations of humor, dating all the way back to Plato and Socrates. The first goes by the name of superiority theory. The idea is that we laugh at, if you can't read this in the back, it says, which of the following is the largest? And this poor contestant on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire has narrowed it down to two, an elephant and the moon. And somehow chooses the moon. No, excuse me, somehow chooses an elephant. And the idea behind superiority theory is that we tend to laugh at what Hobbes called situations involving sudden glory. We wrote about this in Leviathan. When bad things happen to other people, especially to people we don't like or people we don't care about. And many things that we laugh at seem to have that kind of element. The second member of the big three is largely accredited to Freud. It goes by the name of release theory or relief theory. Essentially, that we tend to laugh at situations in which we can express our sexual or aggressive tendencies in some acceptable way, as demonstrated here. The third member of the big three, and the 8,000-pound gorilla, is some version of incongruity theory. That we tend to laugh, that we tend to find funny the things in the world that seem to be surprising, that are some mismatch between what we expect and what we actually get. Now, as Caleb and I were reading about these theories, you can see how each of them have elements to it that you can very easily apply to the circumstances in the world in which you laugh at. But we all found them undesirable. The two of us found them undesirable for various reasons. One is none of them does a good job of explaining what makes things funny rather broadly. The other is that they tend to short circuit when you try to explain the things that are not funny. So, for instance, accidentally killing a loved one would assert your superiority, would be a way to allow some release of aggressive tendencies, and certainly would be incongruous behavior, but it's hardly a gut buster. But one thing that this search did yield was a little cited paper, a little known paper in the journal Humor by a linguist named Thomas Veitch. And when Caleb and I read this paper, we realized rather quickly that Veitch had nearly nailed it. That his theorizing was really quite good. And what we set about to do was to add some psychology to this theory and start testing it in the humor research lab. And we call it the benign violation theory. Essentially, that we tend to laugh at situations. Oh, we lost this. I have a big voice. I can yell if I need to.
You want to take this?
Well, let's see. Is this on?
Put them on the screen.
Something went wrong, and we don't have time to hunt for it.
All right, we'll do it. I'll switch to this. The idea behind the benign violation theory is actually a bit counterintuitive. That is that humor is something that's pleasurable. It's characterized by this positive feeling, amusement, a judgment, hey, that's funny, and laughter, signaling this positive feeling. And yet, at the very foundation of the benign violation theory is this idea that humor comes from something that's threatening, that's unacceptable, that seems wrong in some way. So Mark Twain recognized this. He famously said that the secret source of humor is not joy, it's sorrow. There is no humor in heaven. Because heaven's perfect, there's no violations there. There's nothing to laugh about. Now, of course, the things that we tend to find threatening, unacceptable, wrong, don't usually make us laugh. They usually create some negative emotion. They disgust us. They offend us. They cause fear. They cause confusion. They cause negative emotions. And so you need this other judgment, this other recognition and appraisal that the situation is safe, acceptable, or okay, or in our vernacular, benign. And the idea that recognizing something as both wrong and then okay switches the sign to this and creates a pleasurable experience. So, for instance, tickling fits a benign violation account. It's a harmless attack. It's an attack that causes laughter when done in a way that's not too aggressive and done by someone who you love, who you trust. Wordplay, puns and other types of wordplay violate some linguistic convention, rule, or norm, but at the same time they're okay by some other perspective. So I brought some of my favorite bits of wordplay here. Yeah. This says, best pickup line ever. What's wrong about this situation? Someone want to volunteer what's wrong with this picture? What's wrong with this image?
There's no hyphen between pick and mouth.
There's no conventional use of the phrase.
It's not how it's conventionally used. When people talk about best pickup line ever, they're talking about dating situations, pickup lines at bars. But yet it's okay, it's acceptable, it's technically correct. There is a line of pickups here. Okay, I think this group is really going to enjoy this next one. These are terrible puns. So, for instance, if a clock gets hungry, it goes back 4 seconds. Indeed, terrible. So these are terrible in 2 different ways. And then lastly, save energy. How would you like it if someone turned you on and left you there? So when I give this talk, this bit always gets the biggest laugh, and I think that it does in part because the violation is sexual in nature. You're talking about sex here, and you even have this now a little phallic object as the switch, but one that is not really. Not really a you-know-what. So, so here we are. We're testing this. We're testing this idea, and we're publishing the results in some of the top journals in psychology. And one of the really nice things about it is people care about humor, and so it starts getting some attention. And a local journalist here, Joel Warner, who works at Westward magazine. It's a weekly independent paper here. He approaches me and says, "I'd like to do a story about the Human Research Lab and about your theory and so on." And I'm like, "Sure, that'd be great." And one day he says to me, "I'd like to take you to a comedy club, and I want you to use the benign violation theory to critique the comedians." And I said, hold on a second. Let me make sure that I actually have convinced you that this theory's right. Okay. So Joel says, "All right, let me hear your best evidence. What's the best evidence that you have?" So I'll give you 3 pieces of evidence that I think is really good evidence for a benign violation account. And the reason that it's good evidence, I think, is that these other theories have trouble accounting for these kinds of situations. So the first is that any good theory has to differentiate humorous situations from non-humorous situations. And one thing that the big 3 do is they're very good at predicting when something will be funny, but they tend to fall short when something is not funny. One of the interesting things about humor is that your attempt to be funny, my attempts to be funny, can fail in one of 2 ways. The situation can be purely benign. That is, that the attempt results in a pallid response, a neutral response, a non-emotional response. For instance, tickling yourself. You can't tickle yourself because there's no violation there. The reverse can happen. A situation can be purely a violation. There's nothing benign about it. So imagine on your way home tonight, a creepy stranger in a trench coat comes up to you and tries to tickle you. There's nothing okay about that situation. You get the negative emotions that come with that violation. You scream, punch him in the nose. So the benign violation theory recognizes that there's this sweet spot between recognizing that something is wrong and also recognizing that it's okay. So we actually tested this in the Human Research Lab. We had a research assistant who was unaware of the hypotheses that we had, approach people on campus and say, "Would you like to participate in a survey?" They'd say, "Sure." She says, "I'd like you to read the following scenario." And she places a sheet of paper in front of them, and they would read, "Before he passed away, Keith's father told his son to cremate his body. Then he told Keith to do whatever he wished with the remains. Keith decided to snort his dead father's ashes."
That's gross.
Ed says, "That's wrong."
Not funny.
Not funny. Does someone here think it's funny? All right. Well, undergraduates at the University of Colorado do think this is funny. At least some of them do. Why might they?
Goofy.
Why might they think that it's funny?
They're not father. They haven't experienced death yet. And they snort
They're into snorting other things.
Because they're in a drug culture where kids their age will snort anything.
Well, so one thing is that this is an allusion to an alleged scenario in which Keith Richards described himself as having snorted his dead father's ashes. The other thing is that if you look closely at this situation, Keith's father says, "Do whatever you want with my remains." He gives him permission to do this. And what we found was a host of different reactions. The research assistant was looking at the face of these survey respondents as they were reading it, and then she just coded whether they laughed or smiled or not. And then what we asked them after they read this was, can you see how this situation is wrong? Yes, no. Can you see how this situation is not wrong? Yes, no. And what we found was that the respondents who basically checked yes to each of those questions, I see how this is wrong, I see how it's not wrong, were 3 times more likely to laugh and smile in response to this. They had to see it as both wrong and okay, as a benign violation. Now, what this scenario highlights is the vast individual differences between what people find to be funny and not funny. So within that sample, there were people who found it funny and not funny. There was a group of people on campus who generally found it funny, a group of people in this room who didn't find it funny. And I asked why not, and one person says they haven't experienced death. They haven't had it be enough part of their life. So from a benign violation account, you can actually explain why is it the case that one person is laughing hysterically in response to a joke. Another person is like, this is the most boring joke I've ever heard. And yet another person is horribly offended. Because what we see as wrong, as okay, is mediated by our experiences, by our values, by our culture. By the way we see the world. And so the same exact situation can be seen as funny to some, not funny to others, and the way they see that as not funny may be totally benign or totally a violation. So when you think about this situation with this church raffling off a Hummer, you get that same kind of situation. And so in the Humor Research Lab, we actually tested this. We created a scenario akin to the one that I had discussed at Tulane. In order to recruit new members, a church is raffling off a new H2 Hummer SUV. Anybody who joins the church in the next 6 months will be eligible to enter and win the H2. And then we just simply ask respondents, is this funny? And while generally people found this behavior to be wrong, to be upsetting, to be disgusting in some way, we found that whether someone found it to be funny or purely disgusting depended on whether they were regular churchgoers or not. So the sample, a number of people who didn't go to church regularly tended to find that this was funny. They could sort of see how this was okay. But people who went to church regularly were upset by this. This was a big threat to how sacred the church is. Churches shouldn't behave in this kind of way. And it's actually a really interesting thing about humor because, which makes it really hard to understand why other people find things funny that you don't. You have to be able to put yourself in their shoes almost totally to see how they see the world, to try to experience the world in the way that they experience it. And as a result, it's very hard to be broadly funny. The third piece of evidence that I presented to Joel is related again to a Mark Twain quote. So if you ask people what makes things funny, they'll often quote, at least a quote that's attributed to Mark Twain, and they'll say that humor is tragedy plus time.
Sometimes.
Exactly, sometimes. So so first of all, the quote, humor is tragedy plus time, recognizes this idea that you need something wrong to create humor. And what it says is that with enough distance, that as you move away from something, whether it be in time or in physical distance, or as Hobbes recognized, social distance happening to other people, or with regard to hypotheticality. So the idea that, for instance, that some of the best humor on television takes place in the form of cartoons. So if you think about all the terrible violations happening on Family Guy or on The Simpsons, in part, those situations are okay because they're not real. They're happening to cartoon characters. So we've been looking at this idea in the Humor Research Lab, and what's really cool about it is that a benign violation account makes some unique predictions about the role that distance will play in humor. So one thing, for instance, is that, let's say, as time passes, what the passage of time does is it helps reduce the threat of the bad things, the violations of tragedies. And so, for instance, getting hit by a car 5 years ago is much more likely to be considered funny than getting hit by a car yesterday, because time has helped reduce that threat. Starts to fade in memory. So, but what's interesting is that time doesn't make everything funnier. In the case of very mild mishaps, mild violations, time actually makes them less funny. So if you think about like stumbling on a curb or stubbing your toe, that's more likely to be funny close than 5 years ago. After 5 years, you don't even remember that situation. All of the threat is gone. It's a purely benign situation. And so what it demonstrates is how difficult it is to create humor, because there are multiple things happening here. There's this degree of violation, and then having the right amount of distance that can help make it funny. So Mel Brooks talked about this role that social distance can play. So he said that tragedy is when I cut my finger, comedy is when you fall down an open sewer and die. Yes.
Well, like your previous question, if you were to make it more benign and say, so everybody in the congregation quit so they could rejoin in a raffle, would that change the number of people that thought it was funny?
Yes.
So if you didn't hear me, he said, he was talking about the scenario with the church raffling off the Hummer. Says if you further describe the situation where everybody in the congregation quits and then rejoins as a way to try to win the summer, would it become funnier?
Yeah, and funnier.
Yeah. So my hunch is yes. I don't have those data, but my hunch is yes. And the reason I think is that what that addition to the scenario does is it makes it more hypothetical. It makes it less real, in part because it's hard to imagine an entire congregation.
There's more justice.
There's a violation there, right? There's a violation of the loyalty to the church.
So he just says, well, there's also an additional violation here, and one that's okay, right? You quit and rejoin because you have a reason to do so. So you're now adding a second. What's that?
They deserve what they got. It makes it funnier to me.
Right. It takes away the violation to these pious church people because they're all in on it.
Yeah. So what ends up happening a lot of times is that that you end up having multiple things that are wrong about a situation and multiple reasons that they may be okay. I think demonstrating the complexity of these kinds of situations.
Yeah.
That'd be kind of how you tune up a joke, right? You get a tepid response and you move your set point somewhere.
So one of the things that happens, so I can tell you, Adam's gone, so I can reveal his secrets. So one of the things that happens with comedians is that they are constantly testing the boundaries of their jokes. So they're presenting a joke, they're gauging the response. So is the response one of boredom or one in which people are offended and throwing the beers at him? All right. Well, if it's a boring, tepid response, I'll bump up the violations. I'll start to move into sort of more dangerous territories. Is it that I'm getting the reverse? Well, how do I kind of tamp it down? How do I find ways to make this okay? And And there are many ways that you can go about doing that. In the same way that you can build on this church hummer scenario to make it funnier and funnier, build additional jokes onto it. So this idea of distance demonstrates, well, the degree of distance depends on the degree of violation. But one of the other things about it, the work that we've done, is show that Mark Twain was only partially correct. That it's not humor is tragedy plus time, but rather humor is tragedy plus the right amount of time. That as you move away from some tragic situation, it enhances the likelihood that you might find it funny. But with further time, and further time, and further time, eventually you reduce the threat of this completely, in the same way that stubbing your toe or stumbling on a curb is not funny 5 years later. Even a tragedy can eventually become totally benign, totally irrelevant. So people don't make Civil War jokes anymore, right? And or if you think about like the latest Hollywood icon who dies suddenly and tragically, there's a bunch of jokes that rise up, and then eventually as you move away, they die off. So you get these nonlinear effects of psychological distance that's uniquely predicted by a benign violation account. That you need to find that sweet spot between wrong and okay, and totally wrong and totally okay. So Joel said, all right, you've got me most of the way convinced. Let's go to this open mic night, which has a reputation of being the toughest open mic night in Denver, Colorado. It's on Colfax at the Squire Lounge. I'm feeling pretty good about myself, and in a moment of hubris, I say, why don't I get on stage and tell some jokes? So he's like, that would be a great idea. He wants a good story, and he's looking for a good story. So in about 24 hours, I put together about 3 or 4 minutes of material on how to create a good nickname. And I actually tried some of my jokes out with some friends, and they thought they were funny. And I get up on stage at the Squire, and the audience is filled with wannabe comedians and dirtbag hipsters, and I bomb. And afterwards, I'm thinking to myself, I talked to Joel, I was like, you can't expect to kill. You can't expect to be funny right away. But still, it made me realize something. It made me realize that because humor is such a complex topic, it's such a mysterious topic, while you need the laboratory, while you need that kind of experimental control, you need the data, you can't just leave it to the lab. And I invited Joel to join me on what we call the Humor Code Project. So there's me bombing at the Squire one night, and to join me on the Humor Code Project. And the Humor Code Project is a global search for what makes things funny. So we traveled around the world. We spent about 1.5 years traveling the world, trying to see humor in all its glory. And along the way, we tried to answer a variety of questions. So I'll give you a little bit of a view of some of the stuff that we did. So one thing that we did was go to Los Angeles and go to New York City to try to understand who is funny and how do you go about making funny. And so we looked up at improvisers and we looked at stand-up comedians. We made friends with the editor, the cartoon editor at the New Yorker, to look at the New Yorker cartoons and so on. And all along the way, I keep trying to test out the benign violation theory to see how it goes. Well, one of the nice things about the benign violation theory, I think, is that it explains humor rather broadly. And so I would always ask comedians about it. What do you think? Is this right? Is this wrong? And we had a moment where we got to ask Louis C.K. So if you're not familiar with Louis C.K., he is one of the really hot comedians these days. He's doing some of the really most cutting edge comedy. And I'm a big fan of Louis. I was excited to ask him. And we approached him in a green room. He's eating a ham sandwich. He's not in a very good mood. I start telling him about the benign violation theory, and he just cuts me off. He says, it's not that simple. It can't be that simple. To try to explain humor with one theory would be like trying to explain all of human cognition with one theory. So here we are sort of stumbling around trying to figure out what to talk to him about. And what tends to be a trend when I get together with Joel Warner is I tend to say the wrong thing, and he tends to be embarrassed by me saying the wrong thing. So I'm stumbling around, and I say, well, we were talking to some of your fans out in the foyer, and they had some questions for you. And Joel's like, you don't ask that question. You don't want to ask that question. And I met one woman, drunk woman. She said she wanted to know how big your penis is. And he had a little bit of a smirk. And he said, I'm not going to answer that question. And I said, well, if you don't answer the question, then it means that it's small. And at that point, Louis was finished with us. He was ready for us to go. But one of the interesting things that I've learned about Louis C.K. is although he won't endorse a benign violation account, he uses it. He uses it in his routine. So I'll show you a little clip that I have of Louis that I think is a very good demonstration of this. Oh wait, we lost it. What is this?
Yeah, sorry. We lost it when we lost your mic.
This is really funny. I can't recreate the magic.
Yes.
Can you take that out and just put it on the speaker and have to put the mic and put it on the speaker on the computer?
That sounds like a better
I think it's on.
It's on. It's not plugged in right. So
No, we have a problem.
Hit the volume now.
Yeah. We lost that. We lost that.
Because if benign violations alone, it goes to something like this. What is the moment that
yeah.
18 level old.
Technical difficulty, that unexpected technical difficulty.
Ed, why don't you try taking it out and just put the mic on the computer and put the...
I can try that.
Put the speaker in front of
want to try
it.
that?
Take that out.
Okay.
All right. And now the speaker on the computer.
There it is.
Okay.
Keep going up. You're still turning it on. You should be able to go up the side.
I think if you put the microphone right next to the speaker...
This is revenge for asking that stupid question about
Tell me down here for you.
All right, let's give Ed a moment here. I can answer some questions while we're working this out. Is that okay? Yeah. Sure. Yes, sir.
I have
Everybody has a competition in their brain of good thoughts and bad thoughts. Hopefully they win. The good thoughts win. For me, I always have both. I have like the thing I believe, the good thing. That's the thing I believe. And then there's this thing. And I don't believe it, but it is there. It's always this thing and then this thing. It's become a category in my brain that I call, of course, but maybe. I'll give you an example. Okay, like of course, children who have nut allergies need to be protected. Of course. We need to segregate their food from nuts, have their medication available at all times, and anybody who manufactures or serves food needs to be aware of deadly nut allergies. Of course. But maybe if touching a nut kills you, you're supposed to die. Of course not. Jesus.
I have a nephew who has that. I'd be devastated if something happened. But maybe, if we all just do this for 1 year, we're done with nut allergies forever.
So, what are you seeing here? Well, very clearly, he's creating situations that are wrong, but maybe okay. Violations, maybe benign. So one of the interesting things that you start observing comedians, you start observing comedy, is the way they go about creating a benign violation and making people laugh. So one way is to take a normal situation, a situation that's okay, and highlight what's wrong with it. Move it from benign to benign violation. I call this the Seinfeld strategy, named after Jerry Seinfeld, and a comedian who has a show about nothing, a show that's seemingly about normal situations, but one that he and his cast creates. They create problems. So if you look at Jerry Seinfeld's comedy, even his very early stuff, you can see him doing this. Here's the next clip.
There's a new kind of socks out. Deodorant socks. Gang, these are great. I bought these socks. I wore them 10 hours. Jogging, basketball, tennis. Took them off. They didn't smell a bit. But my feet. It was unreal. I'm telling you, it was unreal. My pants couldn't take it. They were rolling up and down by themselves. Frightening experience. You know, my favorite thing is when you buy socks, though. They never just give you the sock. They always give you that little hanger with the sock. Do I need that hanger? Do you need that hanger? I mean, is there anybody that has like a little sock closet at home? Open them up, pick out what they're going to wear. Let's see. Argyle is nice. These are clean. It's got a little plastic from the dry cleaner.
So Jerry, I think I've always enjoyed that one. This idea of this very normal thing, something you don't ever think about, points out what's wrong with that situation.
Yeah.
So the other strategy is to take something that's wrong, take the violation, and find a way to make it okay. To move it into that sweet spot. So I call this the Silverman strategy, after Sarah Silverman, who pretty much every time she gets on stage, she commits a hate crime. But yet she finds a way to do these things in a less threatening way. Saying them in a cute, non-threatening voice, putting them to music. In this clip, she finds a way to take some situation that seems really wrong and make it okay.
Something for Kyle. Is that his name? Oh my God, Sarah, remember knickers? Yeah, I hate knickers. I didn't say what you thought I said. I was actually
So what gets the big laugh? There's this moment of, oh my God, I can't believe this is happening. It becomes okay. So to this point, we've been talking about the antecedents of humor, the things that precede a situation that is amusing, that we say is funny, that we laugh to indicate this amusement. But any theory of humor should also take into account some of the consequences, some of the benefits, and some of the potential costs of pursuing humor. And one of the things that Joel and I did, that's Joel there on the right, or on my right, we went to the Amazon. We got on a cargo plane with 100 hospital clowns and Patch Adams, and went to one of the poorest places in the world, to Belen, a slum on the edge of the Amazon. And we wanted to look at this question of, is laughter really the best medicine? And there's good reason to believe that humor, that laughter is good medicine, even if you don't believe it's the best medicine. So for instance, humor has this positive emotional response. And there's a great deal of research that shows that our positive emotions help buffer us from a stressful world. They help us. They help our immune system. They help us be happy, and happy people can better deal with pain and stress and adversity. People who are funny, people who are humorous, are well liked. People want to spend time with folks who are funny. And as a result, being humorous is advantageous when it comes to social support. And social support is one of those things that help us deal with pain, stress, and adversity. And then finally, humor may help us cope. By taking the things in the world that are violations, finding a way to make them okay, and make them laughable, make them humorous, not only creates positive emotions and helps bring people around us, but it fundamentally changes the way we see the world. It takes those things and it robs those bad things of their bite. And so in that way, you can expect humor to help cope. The Humor Research Lab, we've been doing work on what I call humorous complaining. So a complaint is an expression of dissatisfaction. A humorous complaint is an expression of dissatisfaction that makes people laugh. And a humorous complaint seems to have a lot of power. So it has a lot of power because people like humorous complainers more than serious complainers. What's that? Yeah, so there's a long history of humorous complaining. So Lysistrata, the oldest satire, was a Greek play that criticized the Greek government's role in the Peloponnesian War. Is essentially a very long humorous complaint. Jon Stewart, Stephen Colbert humorously complain about our media and about our government. And in many ways it's become the source of news for an entire generation, for part of the world as a result, because the regular news is just so depressing. So humorous complaining is really a powerful tool. It can bring people towards us when normal complaining tends to push people away. It focuses our attention on the more positive aspects of the bad parts of our life rather than the purely negative aspects of it. And it's also a way to kind of cut through a cluttered world. So what I'll show you here is a humorous complaint about a biker who had to deal with the New York City Police Department.
So I got a ticket for not riding in the bike lane, but often there are obstructions that keep you from properly riding in the bike lane.
Listen up. As you've been hearing on our show and elsewhere, the police continue to crack down on biking infractions. As the number of bikers explodes throughout the city, ticketing is on the rise. Casey in Manhattan, you got a ticket this month?
Yeah, I got a ticket about 3 weeks ago for riding my bike not in the bike lane.
Not in the bike lane. Alex is holding up a sign that says, you could have just said it.
Oh, okay.
His sign says, not illegal.
Yeah.
I wish I'd known that before I paid the $50 ticket.
Well, so...
So my suspicion is that Casey is better off having made that video than just a video that was a serious complaint. Yes.
On TV, there's a good one. It shows it's from Discount Tires, and it says, "If you don't like our product, just bring it back." And here's a little old lady with her tire, and she slams it through their front window. It's cute.
I haven't seen that one. The most famous, I think, humorous complaint is United Breaks Guitars. So Dave Carroll, a Canadian musician, had his Taylor guitar, his $2,500 guitar, damaged in a flight. He was unable to get compensation for this, and he made a music video, a parody of his experience. That video has 13 million views, international media coverage, and United Airlines was begging him to take their money. Sir?
Yeah, the question from over there reminded me of one of the funniest things that ever appeared in Mad Magazine. They did a parody of newspapers, and they had an ad in it or something, and it said, "Your money back if not satisfied, but we're sure we'll be satisfied with your money."
I don't know if you're at the point where you're taking questions, but I have a general observation and question about the stand-up comedians. I can imagine a non-English speaker sitting in the audience listening to Seinfeld or Louis C.K. or any number of those comics, listening to timing, inflection, gesture, and the reaction of people around them, and having a great night and laughing and thinking it's funny, and yet not knowing the content whatsoever. I wonder if you can comment on that.
I can. Actually, that's actually a pretty good segue. So what I'd like to do for the next few minutes, I'm just going to give you a taste of some of the other locations that we went, and I'll comment on this, and then we'll open it up to questions. I find that the study of humor lends itself more to conversation than lecture, and I'm sure you're eager to make observations and to question this. So one of the places that Joel and I went was Tanzania. So we went to Bukoba, to the site of an alleged laughter epidemic in 1962. And what we wanted to investigate is this general question of why we laugh. And from a benign violation standpoint, the idea, I think, is that humor has its roots in evolutionary processes, that we lived in a world of physical threats, of ecological threats, and to recognize those threatening situations were safe was a good skill to have, and that laughter, the ability to communicate to others that this potentially bad situation was okay, was an important thing to have. And it explains in part why laughter is contagious, right? So that people will spontaneously laugh when other people are laughing there. And I think that because we have such strong associations with laughter and the positive experience of amusement, that if you're sitting in a room with other people who are experiencing it, that it can be contagious, and that it can get passed on, even though you don't really know what's going on. You may be able to piece some of it together, but the collective experience can be that of positivity. To answer this question, actually, what we found was this alleged laughter epidemic was a case of mass hysteria, in which laughter was one of the symptoms that was getting passed from person to person, usually young girls. We went to Japan. This is the CEO of Yoshimoto, which is the comedy purveyor in Japan. And we went there because people kept saying to us, "Will you explain Japanese comedy for me? I just don't get it." And what we found in Japan was really interesting. Unlike the United States, which it's acceptable to experience humor, to make jokes in a wide variety of situations, with funerals being one of the only places that it's not okay. In Japan, it's very segmented, that it's not appropriate to joke in a variety of situations that Americans are often used to doing. The other thing that we realized was that the crazy game show, comedy shows that when Americans see on TV, they just can't believe how dangerous they are, we found out they're not populated by regular, everyday Japanese folks. They're actually populated by comedians. And so the people getting wiped out on Wipeout tend to be professional comedians, thus making it a little bit more okay when these things happen. We went to Scandinavia, we went to Denmark and to Sweden to look at the dark side of humor. We investigated the Muhammad cartoon controversy. This is with Lars Vilks, who is an artist who has a bounty out on his head for drawing the face of Muhammad on the body of a dog, which he thinks is a funny thing to do. But obviously a lot of people find that to be horribly offensive.
But if his face has never been drawn, how does everybody recognize it as his face?
Well, actually, so one of the interesting things that came out of this is that there's nothing in the Quran that says that you can't draw Muhammad. What was upsetting to Muslims about the Muhammad cartoon controversy is the way that Muhammad was depicted. So, in particular, Kirk Westergaard drew him with a turban with a bomb in it. There's actually a painting of Muhammad in the Supreme Court. No one has ever objected to that, in part because Muhammad is being portrayed positively and in a place of reverence. We also went to the West Bank. We went to Palestine to look for humor where you least expect it. So, can you find humor amongst people who are oppressed, people who are poor, people who want their freedom? And again, we found lots of humor, in part because you need these violations. And whenever you have things that are wrong, if you can find hardy, robust individuals, people who are trying to cope with their situation, you're going to find humor. This is actually in Hebron, and this is a Palestinian shopkeeper on the right and an Israeli police officer on the left, and they've actually become friends during this police officer's constant rounds there, and they're joking with each other in this photo. And then finally, one of Joel's conditions to do the Humor Code project was, he said, you need to prove that you've actually learned something, and you need to get back on stage. But you can't do it at the Squire. You need to do it on a bigger stage. I was like, okay, where? And he said at the Just for Laughs Festival, the world's largest comedy festival in Montreal. And so this is me last July performing at a professional comedy club. Only the second time that I've actually got up in front of an audience like that. And I'll leave you with one of my jokes. So. When I tell people that I'm studying humor, they like to quote E.B. White. So E.B. White wrote that dissecting humor, analyzing humor is like dissecting a frog. Few people care, and the frog dies of it. Well, I like to think that if jokes are like frogs, there's a lot of sick frogs out there. And if cutting up a few frogs might help, I think it's worth doing. You could say, I've dissected this frog. I found out what's wrong with him. He thinks that wearing a sweater vest is funny. So I'd love to answer questions. Yes?
So that was great. I'll tell you what. I will trade 2 comments for 1 question. Do we have a deal?
Sure.
Okay. So first of all, in terms of laughter being contagious, my daughter lives on the West Bank. She's Israeli, and I have 5 grandchildren. And we talk on the phone. And as soon as if one of them is upset or whatever, I just start laughing. And the kid starts laughing. Bubby's laughing on the other side of the phone. It just makes him laugh. And then they're all laughing. So, whatever. But the other thing is this humorous complaining. Somehow, I don't know why, I can't do it in a room like this, but when I'm on the phone complaining to, like, Comcast, but why I have to be on hold for 20 minutes to speak to somebody in the Philippines who only knows how to say yes. Yeah. And then I say, well, may I speak to somebody in the United States? Well, yes. And then I'm on hold for another 20 minutes, and then I get disconnected. So I basically end up engaging, finally, when I get to talk to the person in the United States, in telling this story, and then getting on some humorous thing. And then as soon as they laugh, I say, oh, you're great. You can laugh at my jokes. And then they laugh again. Before I know it, I've gotten a $10 credit on my bill because I was so funny as well as being so miserable. And so it really does work to, you see, even some people here laughed, and I'm not even on the phone with Comcast. There you go.
So what's interesting is that I think you're one of the lucky ones when it comes to humorous complaining. And the reason is that our research has identified one potential risk of humorous complaining. And that is that if you want a response from someone, if you want them to right some wrong, that by complaining humorously to them, you basically indicate, well, this is not that serious. Because things that are humorous tend to be more playful and not serious. What I think is happening with you, and I think is an interesting observation, is that when you can use humor to sort of break this very professional relationship, how it enhances liking.
Yes,
and how
exactly.
that can get you, you get, what is it saying? You get a lot farther with sugar.
I want to comment on that, if I may, since I've already taken up so much of your time on this one. A little bit more won't hurt. I know, Ed always wants me to take up less airtime. So your point, that's exactly right, because when I do the humorous complaining, I'm never complaining about the person I'm talking to.
Right.
I'm complaining to them about the person before them and telling them how great they are. And heck, even if they work for Comcast, they've been on hold for 20 minutes in the past with Comcast too. And so they can basically empathize with me, and then we're friends in the same battle, and then they give me the $10 or 20, whatever.
So one of the things that happens is that people are looking for a good sense of humor. So when they're looking, you ask them about, looking for a partner, what do you want? I want a good sense of humor. What they're really saying is, I want someone who laughs at my jokes. I want someone who will make me laugh. And that person's going to be a very good partner. And they're a good partner because they're going to bring you more pleasure. They're going to help you transform those things that are wrong in the world into things that are wrong and yet okay. And also, it says we're alike. When we laugh at the same things, when we see the same things as wrong and okay, it basically is a signal that we share the same values. Right? And so all of those things make our lives better, but it also is a predictor of success. You started a question earlier.
This gentleman. Oh, he's got it.
Yeah, you touched a little bit on ethnicity of humor, and one thing a number of people have noticed in this country, a high percentage of comedians, it seems, are Jewish. And I've heard it said that maybe one reason for this, perhaps, is because of what you also said, the relationship between tragedy and humor. That because of perhaps even the experience of oppression and even of the Holocaust, that Jewish people have sought refuge or defense, perhaps in humor. I'm just wondering if you had any comment on that, or thought that was valid.
So I have two comments. So one is that I think that comedy really lends itself to this idea of being an outsider. So not only is the case that comedy is populated by heavily populated by Jews, but also by African Americans and other minorities. And the reason I think that that's the case, there's some evidence for this, is that when you're part of the dominant culture, everything seems normal. But when you're living in that culture, but you don't quite fit, you get to see the things that are wrong with it. So my example of this is Chris Rock. So Chris Rock is doing some of the best comedy. He's been doing some of the very good comedy for 20 years now. And one of the interesting things about Chris Rock was that he grew up in the hood, but he was bused to a white school. And he never fit in either of those places. And one thing about Chris Rock is that his comedy appeals both to black and to white audiences. And he seems to be able to navigate that world very, very much. With regard to the Holocaust, there is evidence that there was humor in the concentration camps.
Of course.
We actually interviewed a Holocaust survivor in in Jerusalem, and one of the things that she said was, yes, there was humor in those situations, but there was more humor. She experienced more humor when she was, for instance, like in a work camp, and she experienced it most when she was with other people. At the end of the day, if it was an especially good day, they had managed to get a little bit extra food. That there had to be the sort of right set of situations to be able to find that. When things were so bad, it was very difficult to find humor in those kinds of situations, no matter how hard it was.
I'm at the back. Maybe why don't you walk up front, Judge?
All right. Yeah. There's one thing. You just hit on a couple of things. There's this thing about contagion and the unifying power of humor. People laugh. You kind of you want to join and laugh too. You want to be part of that. But you also hit on this sort of dark environment in which humor shines. What I wanted to ask you about is humor also has this dark side. I was thinking of when bullies pick on people, right. They laugh, they point, and then if you're not joining with them laughing and picking on people, I think of armies and the horrible things that happen when soldiers catch the enemy and then start, hey, look, you loser, da-da-da. That sort of humor. Did you guys touch on that at all in any of your studies?
Ed is fast. So in our travels to Scandinavia, that was something that we talked a lot about. So there's this tendency for in sort of modern day societies to see humor as this positive thing, but historically it wasn't always thought of as a positive thing. So laughter was actually thought as kind of impolite and distasteful, and a lot of the situations that people created humor were situations of ridicule, putting down others. And there is really a very thin line between bullying and teasing, for instance. So teasing helps bring people together. So it serves a function, it delineates some boundaries, but good teasing, or teasing that's successful, brings both the teaser and the teasee closer to one another. But bullying, while there's still humor in that situation, is one way, right? It's someone from above laughing at someone, below. And that, exactly, humiliating another person. There's humor there. One person's experiencing positive emotion, but the other person is not. And so in that way, it really highlights the risk of trying to be funny. So you can actually successfully be funny in some people's eyes and upset other people. And so it makes it a sort of dangerous, difficult thing to often use in workplaces, in schools, to criticize and so on, because it can be used in this really aggressive way. That's what happened with the Muhammad cartoons. Right? Some people found them funny, most people didn't, but what they really did was basically were designed to put people in their place. Thank you for that.
Thank you. I'm having trouble trying to fit into the pattern that you've described. Some of the variations in humor, for instance, the subtlety of good timing when you're doing stand-up comedy, how something as physical as the Three Stooges and witty as some of the English humor that we sometimes see on PBS and so forth, where it's very subtle and it's a very
more cerebral kind of humor, okay, is going on. I can't see how that fits into this pattern that you've described, which seems fairly straightforward and simple.
So you guys have been spending a lot of time together. So I think your question is really quite reasonable. So I think that there should be skepticism that such a simple idea can explain such a large, vast set of situations that may result in humor. At this point, I can ask you to engage in some thought experiments. I don't have all the data at this point. So my first response to this always is, well, if you think that this benign violation account falls short, you need to give me something that's better. Right? So one of the things that we're always trying to do in the humor research lab is pit theories against each other to see which one is going to do best across the widest variety of situations, which is why we try to look at these questions of distance, for instance, and so on. Yeah. So this issue of timing, I think, really does matter and does fit the theory. And the idea is that good timing brings these two appraisals together, happening nearly at the same time. So a good timing on a joke. So one of the comedians said, I realize that I'm always using the benign violation theory. It goes, my jokes go violation, 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 benign. Or benign, 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 violation. And that a good punchline brings those things together at this moment of realization. And actually there's some research that backs this up. So if you ask people, how do you time a joke? There's this belief that you pause, you set up the punchline, kind of Henny Youngman style. Take my wife, please. But the research by linguists show that that's not the case. That if you analyze comedians' jokes, there is no special pause between the setup and the punchline. When it comes to these differences, so for instance, the Three Stooges is physical humor. One of the critical elements of the Three Stooges is that these guys are not being sort of permanently harmed. And yet that seems really quite different than the kind of wordplay that I was showing you earlier, and the wit and sort of the pleasure that people take in kind of witticisms. Now, I can't say that the theory is perfect. I actually think that what people often think is humor is actually just is creating a moment of insight, is cleverness. So let me explain this for a moment. So when we were in New York, we were looking at these New Yorker cartoons. And one of the things about the New Yorker cartoons is that they're rarely laugh out loud funny. They're more like, that's good. And so my belief about these situations is that's not exactly a humorous response. That's a pleasurable response. But it's one that comes from a moment of insight, from recognition of putting things together. And you get that kind of pleasure outside of humorous experiences. So you get that pleasure from problem solving more generally, solving a difficult problem, creating some new type of innovation or some new idea. Those situations are aha moments. They're pleasurable to have. And I think that the very best New Yorker cartoonists are able to create both that and create humor through some benign violation account.
Last comment, please. Kevin, would you stand up so we can hear you?
I can talk loud enough that I think everybody in the room can hear me. But I couldn't let this pass when that question came up about why the Jews are funny. They have the highest IQ of any ethnic group in the world.
I recognize that's a comment, not a question. But I think that there's a great deal of research that shows that being smart is advantageous when it comes to creating humor, in part because there is this sort of ability, you have to be able to know and understand the world and be able to process it quickly. And people who are intelligent are able to do that, rather well. Yep.
Go ahead.
Yeah, what you seem to be talking about is the cognitive side of analyzing what makes something humorous. I haven't heard a whole lot about it, although I've heard comments about the emotional delivery part of it. And we look at prosody, in other words, how things sound, the quality of the words, and the timing. It's like in music. It's the timing between notes, not necessarily the notes, that often conveys a lot of emotion and the message in music. And then we look at some other populations, for instance, the autistic spectrum individuals, who you can give them the same material. They don't get the prosody. They hear the words, and they may, and some of these individuals, especially the 2E, Asperger's, are extremely high-functioning individuals. They have the intellectual horsepower, but they don't get the humor. Has your research looked at that side? What's missing? I mean, I think of mirroring neurons and how humor can be contagious. And if you don't have them, if you have a deficit in mirroring neurons, then perhaps this explains why humor isn't contagious with that group of individuals. Has your research looked in that direction?
No.
Okay, I'm going to have to cut it off. If long questions like that will go until midnight. Andrew, do you really have to?
Yeah, I have a serious question I'd quite like to ask.
Better be brief, or I'll cut you off.
Yeah, so I'd really like to know, why did the chicken cross the road?
Do you want to answer that?
That's the door around.
Where's your wisdom?
Actually, I just want to say thank you so much for having me here. It's I'm eager to talk to you a little bit more after this. I'll be in the back if you want to chat. And I really hope to catch at least one of these acts. I'm dying to see the unintentional comedy tonight.